Go Long by Hazel Witch. Read by Kaiinbed. Chapter 6 Wonder Duo. Content warning includes some angst, underage drinking, some insinuation of Izuku being taken advantage of, not by Katsuki, via some groping/touching while dancing. There's no way I can go out in public like this. Izuku plucked the fabric at his neck, twisting this way and that to get a good look at his reflection. Why not? You look hot. The springs of the bed creaked slightly under Ochako's excited bounce, altogether a little too pleased with her handiwork. She'd been the one to tear Izuku's sparse wardrobe apart, flinging clothes all over the floor until she dug out the pair of black jeans with a slash over each knee. They'd been bought on a whim, totally not Izuku style, and had never seen the light of day. Or night. She'd also unearthed the old Space Camp tee he kept stashed in the bottom of a drawer as a memento of the summer he'd turned 14. NASA now stretched taut over his chest, and tight sleeves clung uncomfortably snug around his biceps. Studying the mirror, Izuku allowed himself to acknowledge that the regular routine of push-ups and air squats he'd taken up over the past few years had been at least a little transformational. No one could call him weedy anymore, that was for sure, and in this get-up, he almost looked toned, in shape. You look great, Izuku. Trust me. Just let me fix your hair. My hair? Izuku raked a hand through the unruly mass self-consciously. What's wrong with my hair? Ochako slid off the end of the bed and came to stand before him, kindness softening her big brown eyes. Nothing's wrong with it at all. Just a little wild. Here. She spent a few minutes carefully smoothing down the sides and fluffing up the top, coiling his curls around her fingers until they sat neat and shiny. There, what do you think? Ample scatterings of freckles aside, Izuku conceded that he looked better than normal. Still, he couldn't help but feel self-conscious like this. At least when he was hiding in baggy hoodies, no one could actually, perceive him. This level of exposure was daunting. I like it, he said, forcing himself to swallow the nerves and flick Ochako a grateful smile. Good. She slipped her phone off the bed and poked at the screen, playlist cutting out and leaving the room in anticipatory silence. Come on then, Ida and Todoroki will be waiting. Kirishima's house was one of those big white American dream kind of deals. Pillars on either side of the porch, and a driveway big enough for 8 cars. I doubt they can hear us. Todoroki wasn't wrong. The thump 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 of music could be heard halfway down the street. Izuku prayed to God the police wouldn't make an appearance. He tried the doorbell again. My dudes! The door was flung open, music racketing up so loud it made Izuku's eardrums throb. Kirishima stood there, shirtless and chest glistening with something sticky. He really was freaking gigantic. Come on in! Glad you could make it! The 4 of them shuffled awkwardly into the entryway, which turned out to be a marble floor lobby, with elaborate twin staircases winding down along opposite walls. Izuku noted with a smile that long threads of toilet paper already decorated the fancy balustrades. Hope you haven't been waiting long, Kirishima shouted over the music, smile all dopey with booze. I was mid-keg stand, so I couldn't answer the door. Thanks for inviting us, Izuku shouted back, following Eijiro as he led them into the house. Every room was thrumming with bodies, lights hazy and cups strewn over the floor. How Kirishima could be so chill about the state of it all was beyond Izuku's comprehension. As if I'd leave you off the guest list, Mito bro! The easy cheer in Eijiro's voice made Izuku's churning stomach settle just a touch. What a great guy. Chin down, their host stopped and looked between them expectantly, wide grin showing off all his teeth. Come on, guys, I'll get you a drink. What are you having? They all gawked at him, the collective silence telling. Why hadn't they prepared for this? The moment hung on for way too long, Izuku's panic rising as they just stared at each other blankly. I hope you know that underage drinking is illegal, Ida finally said. Absolutely no hope at all. Izuku cringed. This was their first ever house party and their credibility was already hanging in tatters. Not that they really had any credibility to speak of, but still. Luckily, Kirishima only lifted a conspiratorial finger to his lips and smiled. good-natured as always. Shh, I won't tell if you don't. Seriously, what a great guy. After another torturous pause, Todoroki took a confident step forward like he was saving the day. I'll have an old-fashioned, please. Izuku cringed again. Eijiro looked apologetic, scratching at his stubbly jaw. I don't think we've got the ingredients for that. Sorry, man. Todoroki's face settled into a puzzled expression. How about beer? Izuku piped up quickly. Eijiro beamed at that, eyes lighting up like Izuku had spoken the words of his god. Beer! He cried, snapping his fingers. Beer I can do. Okay, 4 beers coming up. They all watched as he disappeared through the house, taking the opportunity to shrug off their jackets and search for somewhere to store them where they wouldn't end up ruined by the end of the night. The house was huge, could fit at least 3 of Izuku's inside easily, but did seem to lack some everyday practicalities, like coat hooks. They settled for a smooth stone statue of some guy in the nude next to the front door, each of them taking it in turns to drape their outerwear over his immaculate sightless face. Here we go, guys, Kirishima said on his return, grinning as he clasped 4 identical red cups together in his hand. Each one had been filled to the brim, a foamy head teetering above the rim. Make yourselves comfortable, he shouted over his shoulder, disappearing into the crowd. They exchanged a look, mutually agreeing to hang back before entering the fray. Whatever we do, we need to stick together tonight, Izuku said to his little circle, and they all nodded seriously before taking their first real slurps of beer. Of course, Ochako agreed, hooking her arm through Izuku's on one side and Ida's on the other as she led the charge. We're in this together. Come on, guys, let's go have fun. It took approximately 30 minutes for the 4 of them to get split up. Ochako was the first to go, pulled up the stairs by a girl with purple hair and black lipstick she knew from her English class. I'll be back in a second, she called over her shoulder, and Izuku knew immediately that he lost her for the night. Todoroki was next, not 5 minutes later, muttering something indistinct about needing the bathroom, but Izuku suspected he was off to find a dark room to lie down in until it was time to go home. Turning to Ida with a sigh, Izuku shook his head, pretending not to notice that his friend's Bud Light was still more or less untouched. I guess He was interrupted by 2 members of the football team, barreling through the room, throwing a delicate china vase to each other like they were tossing a pigskin. Hey! Ida shouted, charging after them as they crashed through the house. Put that down, that is not your property! The last one standing, Izuku finished wistfully as he watched the 3 of them go. Great. Alone and awkwardly sipping at his beer, which was gross by the way, he backed up against the wall and surveyed the carnage around him. It was embarrassing how few people he recognized considering he was in his final year at UA, although it wasn't like he'd ever been a member of a party crowd before. Rowdy teenagers clumped in groups, drinking, laughing, making eyes at each other. They all seemed so carefree. It came so naturally to them. Izuku wanted to join in, but couldn't shake off the fear they turned their backs on him if he approached, that he'd fade into obscurity the moment he opened his mouth and would go back to being invisible. Rejection was a bummer like that. Still, if he was going to get anywhere when he landed in college, he really should at least try to overcome the crippling social anxiety that plagued him the past few years. Eyes darting around the room, he looked for somewhere he could break in. Somewhere he could test the waters without feeling completely out of his depth. Hey! A cheer rose from the other side of the room, a small crowd engrossed in some kind of drinking game. Amongst them, Izuku spied a certain impatient-looking blonde, arms crossed over his chest. They were kinda, sorta, maybe friends by now, weren't they? Him and Katsuki? Izuku hoped so, after all the time they'd spent playing One for All on the lumpy couch in the Bakugo basement. It gave him an opening that he could exploit at least, and it felt like a safe enough place to start, right? Yeah, he could do this. He was brave enough to approach a group of people. Giving himself a little shake and taking a hearty swig of beer for Dutch courage, Izuku took a deep breath and headed over to join them. The group huddled around what looked to be a long antique table. Seriously, wasn't Kirishima concerned about being sent to military school when his folks got home? With red cups arranged in haphazard triangle configurations at each end. Mina had both elbows resting on Kaminari's back as he leaned forward to take aim. Ample cleavage on display in a leopard print crop top. They were definitely losing. Only 5 cups left in front of them. Come on, thanks, Mina crooned, slurring her words slightly. I promise I'll flash you if you get this one in. Kirishima looked horrified. Babe! With a flick of the wrist, Kaminari took his shot, face all lit up like a string of Christmas tree lights at the prospect of seeing actual real-life lady boobs, only for the ping-pong ball to bounce off the end of the table and skitter off into the crowd. Hanta let out a conciliatory oof, and Eijiro's shoulders slumped in relief. Well, thank fuck for that, Katsuki said loudly from the other end of the table, all 10 of his cups still perfectly intact. No one wants to see your tits, Pinky. Mina scoffed at him in an over-exaggerated indignation, waggling her finger in the air with attitude. No one wants to see yours, golden boy, but that doesn't stop them from being on display 24/7. Katsuki tissed and flicked his middle finger at her. I'm sorry, Means. Denki piped up from where his forlorn face had flopped to his forearms. I got overexcited. Izuku hid a laugh behind his set, and Katsuki's eyes slid over to him, nostrils flaring. Oi, Deku, he said pointedly, as close to a hello, how are you as he could get. You just gonna stand there and watch like a dead-ass dodo all night, or are you gonna pitch in to finish these idiots? Me? Izuku squeaked before he could get a handle on his vocal cords. God, why did his voice always rise to a soprano-like pitch when he was nervous? Yeah, you. Katsuki imitated his intonation with an eye roll. Dummy. Izuku stumbled forward, taking up position at Katsuki's end of the table. Okay. The rest of the group turned to look at him, smiling and extending their greetings. Hey, cutie, looking good tonight, Mina called over, syrupy sweet, and Izuku choked on his mouthful. Kirishima slung an arm around her waist and saved him from responding. You know how to play beer pong, Midoriya? Izuku took a moment to focus on the setup before him, zoning in and running through a few different scenarios for how the game could play out from what he'd seen so far. I think I can work it out. Katsuki snorted. Then let's stop with all the talk and get this damn show on the road. It turned out that the video game synchronicity extended into real life, and the two of them made a phenomenal team. As well as being coordinated with each other's every move, their backyard escapades had vastly improved Izuku's aim, standing him in good stead when he raised his elbow and sank another cup with precision. Katsuki was obviously brilliant too, but the best part was the whispered tactics they shared between turns, assessing the best angles to bring their opponents to their knees. Katsuki's voice was gritty and rough in Izuku's ear, breath hot and laced with a scent of whiskey, and Izuku did his best to ignore the somersaults it set off in his stomach. How'd you like that, shitheads? Katsuki crowed as Deku's ball skimmed the rim of their final cup and dropped to Bob on the frothy cheap beer. No! Mina shrieked, and Katsuki plucked fingers in his ears with a grimace. You drink this one, thanks. I can't take any more. Izuku turned and grinned broadly, Katsuki looking just as pleased in that smug way he had. You guys are a wonder duo, Kirishima called across to them, and Izuku felt so happy he could float up to the ceiling and stay there. Not bad, Freckles. Katsuki flicked him one of those rare savage grins before turning back to the group. Alright, fuckers, who's up next? An answer carried from outside their little group, from somewhere in the crowd of bodies all around. Sounds like a challenge I'm down for. The voice came from a dark-haired boy, sloping towards the table. Even in the dim light, his teeth flashed white and perfect, set in a confident smile. He was broad-shouldered and big too, although that was basically the norm in a room full of football players. Good to see you, Bakugo. Katsuki's mouth went tight and thin-lipped. Shindo. He nodded curtly. Hey, man! Kirishima clumsily cheers their cups, so a fresh wave of beer sloshed back onto his hand. You want to take a turn? Always. Shindo replied, twinkling dark eyes glancing over the group and settling on Izuku. You better introduce me to everyone first, though, right? Shit, yeah. Guys, this is Yoshindo. He goes to Ketsubutsu, Bakugo's old stomping ground. So he was one of Katsuki's old classmates. The boy, Shindo, looked Izuku up and down, not sizing him up exactly, more like drinking him in. His gaze drifted lazily back up to meet Izuku's eyes, totally without shame. Then he freaking winked. And who do we have here? Oh, Izuku's ears went hot, like he'd just been stuck under the grill. He was sure his face had turned beet red to match. I'm Izuku Midoriya. It's, nice to meet you. Shindo took a long sip from his cup. Pleasure's all mine. Not knowing where to look, Izuku plucked a ping pong ball from the table and twiddled it between his fingers. What the hell was going on? Was this guy flirting with him? In front of everybody? Surely not. Mina had slipped out of Eijiro's hold and was helping Denki refill the cups, and if Kirishima had noticed anything, he didn't let on. Maybe the guy was just being friendly. So, do I get to play with Izuku? Shindo asked, dropping his voice to an even lower register. Okay, so he really was just that brazen. Next to him, Izuku heard the sound of plastic slamming down hard onto the wood. No, Katsuki said flatly. You don't. There was a pause where they both just kind of looked at each other. Katsuki's brows lowered in a glare, even more menacing than usual. Shindo looked madly delighted at the reaction and was the first to give up on the staring contest, holding up his hands in a peacekeeping gesture. Taking a spot next to Kirishima, his eyes glinted with something mischievous. Okay, man. Chill. It's good. Katsuki just glowered back at him and didn't reply. Feeling exceedingly awkward, Izuku didn't know what to make of potentially being flirted with for the first time ever. So he busied himself with another mouthful of beer. He was already through his second round of nasty bitter stuff and should probably switch to soda. But Kirishima was liberal with the top-ups and he didn't want to be rude. Plus, the unexpected attention had him gulping it down in an attempt to stay cool. His amateur level of alcohol tolerance took a further hit when they started the game and it became apparent that Shindo and Kirishima were far more fearsome competitors than Denki and Mina had been, sharp and assured with each throw, forcing Izuku and Katsuki to down several drinks. Well, Katsuki downed drinks. Izuku guzzled and hiccuped his way through his. Look, he'd had beer before, okay? He just wasn't a big drinker, which was embarrassingly obvious to everyone present when he took a step back too quickly after their hard-won victory and tripped over his feet. He stumbled backward, a grip coming to steady him under the elbow before he could fall. You good? Izuku looked up at his savior, even through slightly bleary vision. Katsuki's eyes were really something else. Light brown, but with something of the sunset about them, like the last rays of light before nightfall, bathing the world in a final fiery glow before the sun dipped out of sight. I'm good, Izuku blustered, quickly looking away and shuffling upright. Katsuki raised a brow when he swayed slightly on the spot. Yeah? 'Cause your eyes just missed it over like you saw the fucking light or something. Oh god. He was being as obvious as usual, staring into Katsuki's eyes like a fool. Fumbling for an excuse, Izuku felt Katsuki's scalding gaze casting up and down, taking in his outfit from head to toe. The ripped jeans, the tight shirt. You look different tonight. Izuku felt so self-conscious, he wanted a hole to open up beneath him so he could drop directly into the planet's molten core. Just water, he mumbled, clearing his throat and trying to sound more sober than he was. I think I need to get some water. Then he turned and scurried off through the crowd before Katsuki could grunt something cutting about him being a fucking lightweight. By the time Izuku had pushed through the throng of partygoers to splash water on his face and gulp down 3 solo cups of water, it was already 10 o'clock and most of the attendees had moved on to the second phase of intoxication. He vaguely noted that the majority could be clustered into 3 major archetypes when it came to how they handled their drunkenness. Some ended up acting particularly stupid and rowdy, bouncing off the walls and taking dares left, right, and center. Others just seemed really sleepy, like the guy slouched on the staircase, snoring softly into the wall. Then there were the guys and gals that appeared to have a direct positive correlation between inebriation and horniness, grasping every piece of bare flesh they could get their hands on. It was like studying a pack of animals. You could probably write an entire PhD thesis on the subject. Ochako was still nowhere to be found, so he ended up weaving a sticky path back to the living room, the floor so tacky from all the spilled drinks that his sneakers made a schlick sound with every step. He hovered in the doorway for a moment to observe, finding that beer pong had been abandoned in favor of other activities. Denki and Hanta were engaged in some kind of fencing match in the middle of the room, equipped with staffs made from duct tape beer cans, while Mina and Eijiro got busy on one of the couches in a makeout session that could definitely not be classed as PG-13. The duos fell into the categories of stupid and horny respectively. Slumped in an armchair beside them, idly scrolling through his phone, and looking distinctly grouchy now that the competitive portion of the evening was over, was Katsuki. He had a whole category of his own. Angry. Izuku took a moment to appreciate the little scrunch between Katsuki's brows that only fully dropped in the moments he thought no one was looking, feeling a sudden surge of pride that he was one of the few blessed enough to have seen his beautiful face without it. Smiling to himself like an idiot, he was just psyching himself up to approach when someone else arrived on scene, trailing a delicate hand over the back of Katsuki's chair and diving fingers into golden spikes. Katsuki's shoulders hunched at the touch, already seething and ready to bite the person's hand off at the wrist. He twisted in his seat, a long list of curses most likely prepared on his tongue, but stopped when he recognized his antagonist. The girl behind him was pretty, like really pretty. Long blonde hair cascading in perfect waves over her shoulders, pink lips pouty as she leaned forward to whisper something in his ear, and Katsuki's face remained neutral. Which, when it came to Katsuki Bakugo, was like witnessing the Pope getting down to Flow Rida in the middle of the Sistine Chapel. Rounding the side of the chair, the girl perched her firm backside on the arm and slithered backward until she landed neatly in his lap, and Katsuki didn't even look like he was going to murder her for it. What was that about? A shiver of unease prickled down Izuku's spine. As if someone had heard his unspoken question, a low voice spoke too close to his ear. Young love. What? Shindo had reappeared out of nowhere, gripping Izuku's shoulder and squeezing lightly. Izuku didn't respond, just watched, frozen and horrified, as the girl traced a slow line down Katsuki's ACDCT with a long pink fingernail. I can't keep up with those two, Shindo continued knowingly. On again, off again, under again. Looks like it might be back on for real this time, though. The words thumped at Izuku's heart like a sledgehammer, stomach suddenly churning so hard he thought he might puke. Oh. Gotta hand it to Kami. She knows how to get what she wants. Oh, God. The wave of nausea built, eyes stinging with the threat of tears. It made total sense. They looked like a couple in a teeth-whitening commercial, both so unbelievably gorgeous and blonde and freakishly symmetrical, and they'd obviously have the most picture-perfect white picket fence life together with their little blonde babies. Oh, God. For some reason, Izuku couldn't tear his eyes away. The girl's hand was gripping Katsuki's bicep, and she threw her head back laughing when he muttered something inaudible. You could take 100 candid photos of her and upload every single one straight to Instagram. #NoFilter. Izuku could never compare. Kimi leaned in close until her lips practically brushed Katsuki's ear, and he didn't even flinch. She whispered something and sat back with a suggestive eyebrow raise, looping her arms around his neck. It hurt to watch. Izuku's chest squeezed so tight he could barely breathe. Staring at her for a long moment, Katsuki didn't immediately respond, just eventually nodded and stood, holding his hand, his beautiful, strong hand. Kami led him off into the crowd. Izuku gaped as he watched them go, chest hitching with a single shuddering breath, overwhelmed by the urge to crawl out of his own skin. Whatever was left of his heart was disintegrating into tiny pieces of ash. Turning, he bumped into Shindo's bulky mass as he stumbled off down the hallway to the kitchen. Hey, Izuku, wait. He bounced off the wall a couple of times, hand clutching his chest, sending a few family photos askew as he went, barely noticing whoever he pushed past to get there. Izuku made it to the sink, tears spilling hot over his cheeks. The splash of cold water did little to help. He was such an idiot. Obviously, Katsuki was straight. Izuku had known that all along. He'd known he'd probably end up with some beautiful, model-esque girlfriend, and that they'd parade around together like Barbie and Ken. And yet he'd gone and fallen for him anyway, given his heart away without making any effort to care for it at all, and now it felt like he was sinking into quicksand, darkness all around, sunk down further and further away from daylight. Are you okay? Staring into the basin, thoughts a mile a minute and slow all at once. It took Izuku a moment to realize that Shindo was leaning on the counter beside him. What's up? Nothing, he replied, voice cracking. The image of slim, dainty fingers on Katsuki's chest still burned into his retinas. Shindo flashed him a knowing look, and Izuku could practically hear him thinking, okay, buddy. I think I know what the problem is. Izuku hummed, barely listening over the white noise buzz in his ears. Downing the dregs of his drink, he replayed the scene over and over in his mind like a slasher flick until he thought he might scream. You like him, don't you? What? Cup slipping from his fingers in shock, Izuku flicked a glance to the other partygoers in the immediate vicinity. Thankfully, they appeared too engrossed in pouring a heinous mixture of beer, White Claw, and orange juice into a mixing bowl to pay them any attention. Still, Izuku dropped his voice to a whisper. No! Shindo continued to look wholly unconvinced. He said. Sure. You know I didn't actually even specify who I was talking about. Crap. Well, it doesn't matter who. Izuku tried weakly, sniffling and swiping miserably at his eyes. I don't like anyone. It was obviously no use, his emotions spilling out before he could scoop them back in and shut the lid. You look like someone who doesn't like anyone right now. Tilting his chin down, Shindo looked at Izuku directly, eyes deep and dark, almost indistinct where pupil ended and iris began. Hey, it's his loss. His tone was steady and sincere, holding eye contact for several seconds longer before pushing off the counter and slipping a hand into a pocket. Listen, I'm sure you're upset, but I've got something that might help you forget about him, if you want. His hand came out, brandishing a hip flask. Izuku's sore eyes widened. He'd never tried anything harder than beer or wine. But if ever there was a time, this was surely it. He wanted to be numb, would try anything to take the edge off, and suddenly Shindo was looking like an unexpected white knight. A kaleidoscope of Katsuki and Kimi swirled through his mind. No matter how hard he tried not to think about what was happening in some far corner of the next room. Hands. Her hands on his chest, her lips on his lips. No. He had to do something. Nodding feebly, he stooped to retrieve his cup and held it out to accept the offer. Shindo nodded back and poured him a finger of clear liquid that smelled remarkably similar to paint stripper. Cheers, the relative stranger said, when he'd poured one for himself too, tipping his head back and downing the liquor in one. Izuku followed suit. The first mouthful of vodka was so disgusting, he spat it straight back out again, and the second stung his throat so bad his eyes watered. But the third, fourth, and fifth were better. The more he downed, the more the liquor served its purpose, hit him hard enough and quick enough to blunt the sharp slash of misery stabbing neatly between his ribs. It didn't get rid of it completely. Couldn't, but at least it did something. He took a sixth, maybe seventh, shot, and everything kind of became a blur after that. Shindo looked like he was swaying, but then so did the kitchen cabinets. In fact, the whole world was slumping from one side to the other, like Izuku was aboard the deck of a ship. You wanna dance? Any distraction was worth a try, so Izuku took the hand proffered to him, allowing himself to be led into a room where the beat thrummed up through his feet hard enough to make his skin vibrate, loud enough to drown out his thoughts. Bodies jostled around him, air humid with shared sweat, the rhythm of the music tethering them together with a single common thread. The alcohol seeped through his veins, and Izuku gave in to the dizziness, let his senses dull to everything but the music, let it dull the ache in his chest. His vision fuzzed at the edges, and he staggered slightly, waiting for the sadness to completely fall away. If he closed his eyes, he could just about focus on the bob of his hips, the discordant bass line and tuneless voices singing along to filthy rap, could just about forget that he wanted to curl up in a ball in the corner of the room and sob his heart out. There were hands on his waist. He wasn't sure whose, but he could sure make a guess. Another sip of vodka, arms in the air, no thinking aloud, no thinking. The room started to spin again, violently this time, and time slipped by like liquid. Izuku couldn't keep track of it. It could have been 10 minutes that had passed, or an hour. There was the press of a body, hot against his back, broad and firm, then out of nowhere the music changed. A layered mid-tempo electro beat striking up, a woman's bittersweet voice on the track. She sounded sad, so sad, and Izuku knew how she felt, like he was in physical pain, like he wanted to sleep for eternity. Oh god. Pushing numbly at whoever was behind him, Izuku lurched forward, pulled so sharply back to reality by the song's lyrics that his stomach sank right through the alcohol-drenched carpet. How could he have even attempted to drown it all out? Katsuki was off with some girl he'd never be able to compete with. Gender aside, he'd never be able to hold a candle to someone like Kami, someone gorgeous and confident and everything Katsuki deserved. Shit, he needed more to drink. Hands roamed up and down the front of his torso, and he felt a sudden forceful wave of nausea. I need some air. Izuku pushed through the bodies, through the house, out through the French doors, and oh, sweet, cool night air. He heaved once, bent over and dizzy, but managed not to vomit. Maybe it would be better if he did. The world tilted and spun abruptly beneath him, unsteady on his feet. He felt like he could tumble right off the edge of it, so he pressed his back up against cool bricks and mortar in the search for some kind of stability. There was something sweet and cloying in the air that didn't help him feel any less ill. Maybe the honeysuckle twining up the trellis or the roses in the flower bed. Whatever it was barely mattered when wave after wave of sadness caught up with him, only temporarily blunted by the alcohol. Hey, you left your drink when you ran off. A dark head bobbed out through the door and joined Izuku on the patio. Shindo peered down at him. You okay? Izuku closed his eyes, head thumping back against the wall. He didn't want to talk about it. How could he find the words? I'm fine. Just a little hot. Well, Shindo's lips curled to one side in a coy smile. He took a step closer so there was only a foot or so between them. You got that right. I'd say more than just a little hot, though. Izuku swallowed. No one had ever pursued him so relentlessly before. No one had ever pursued him, period. Heart rattling and stomach still queasy, he looked up and met Shindo's depthless black eyes. Wasn't it kind of nice, feeling wanted for once? He'd been alone for so long, felt so discarded and useless, and like a tiny speck of nothing that it made a nice change, didn't it? Katsuki would never return his feelings. That much was horribly clear. And Shindo was attractive. Maybe it would make him feel better. Maybe it would patch up the hole where all the awful feelings were leaking out of his chest. Would make everything stop hurting for a few minutes. It was worth a try. Anything was worth a try if it could stop him feeling so dreadful. Yeah, Izuku decided. Anything was better than this. So he let it happen. Let the tall, dark-haired stranger pull him in for a kiss. His very first. It was sloppy, quick, and kind of rough. Shindo's tongue working round his mouth like a washer-dryer. There was no butterflies in his stomach, no parting of the clouds above his head in a divine revelation. Just a clash of teeth and the sour taste of beer. And it didn't help that it didn't work at all, that Izuku could still only think of Katsuki. Katsuki with his crooked grin and cackle of a laugh. Katsuki who secretly liked All Might and helped Izuku rake up leaves in his backyard. Katsuki who'd gone out of his way to distract Izuku when he was at his lowest, and patched him up in the kitchen with such meticulous care. Katsuki who was probably sucking face with perfect Kimi right now. What the fuck? Oh shit. Katsuki, who stood with one leg out the French doors, eyebrows lowered in angry disbelief. Hey dude, kinda busy out here. Shindo's hands were on Izuku's hips, pinning him against the wall, both their lips wet. Eyes flicking haphazardly between them, Katsuki snorted and muttered something that sounded a lot like, fucking disgusting. And Izuku's heart officially broke. Wait, It's not what it looks like. He tried, voice thick with booze, pushing at Shindo's hands. Actually, it's exactly what it looks like. Shindo interrupted, a twinkle of glee in his eyes. So if you could just leave us to it, that'd be swell. Fingers fisting painfully hard at his sides, Katsuki gave Izuku a final, searing look before he ducked back into the house. Where were we? Shindo said with a grin, lunging forward with his eyes closed. Izuku twisted to the side to avoid his approaching lips and wrenched out of his grip, bolting for the doors. Sorry, I'm really sorry, he gasped out as he left the dark-haired boy alone, looking perplexed and slightly put out. Hey, what the... The room still whirled like a carousel as Izuku stumbled through the rooms, searching for Katsuki with growing desperation. In his panic, he banged a hip painfully against the side table on his way past, knocking several drinks to the floor and putting his hands up apologetically. God, I'm so sorry, he mumbled, dropping to his knees and dabbing at the spilt liquid with the hem of his shirt. Izuku? He looked up, eyes welling with tears again at the sight of Ochako. She joined them on the floor. Oh, Izuku, are you okay? What happened? The whole night was all too much. Too much. He hates me, Izuku blurted between sobs that racked from his chest and sent shivers into every extremity. He saw outside and he thinks I'm disgusting. The threads that held his world together were coming undone, loosening at the seams until there was nothing left to stop it all spilling out. Oh, Izuku. Looking concerned, Ochako pulled him into a hug, her arms soft as Izuku buried his face into her shoulder, soaking her dress with tears. Come on, maybe we should go home. Izuku clutched at her with one hand, the other flying to his chest. He wanted to find Katsuki and wanted to explain. But what real use was there? What exactly would he actually say? What did they even have that he was so desperate to salvage? There was no point fighting for something he never had in the first place. Okay, he whispered, defeated, voice quivering under the weight of something lost. Stumbling to his feet, he let Ochako usher him to the door, her grip firm on his arm, whispering something hushed and soothing in his ear that he couldn't even process. Come on, it's okay. Tears flowed freely as he let her lead him down the ridiculous driveway onto the sidewalk, breaths quick and heaving and pierced by the winter air. With each step, the throb of music grew quieter, but the evening of bitter first remained sharp through all the alcohol as Izuku clung to his friend for support. The night hung heavy on his shoulders. It was going to be a long walk home.